Now we're going to look at this graphic, and this is perhaps one of the most important aspects of digitizing, and that's learning to analyze your graphic and plot your digitizing sequence so as your design stitches out in the order that you want it to. Now, unfortunately, I hear an awful lot of drivel about emrab. I've even been told I'm old-fashioned because I don't use all the shortcuts. Well, I'm not going to show you shortcuts. I want you to learn good, sound, basic digitizing practices. And I don't want to show you my shortcuts because if you learn those, you will add even more shortcuts and you will end up never making a decent design. And I'm not telling you this because I'm a fantastic digitizer. I am not. I am just a middling digitizer who has a rotten sense of color. But many, many decades ago, I trained as a printmaker, and part of my training was learning to analyze my intended prints for the color printing sequences. And I might have 5 or 6 layers, and if those layers weren't correctly sequenced, instead of getting a green because I'd done a yellow ink pull and then a blue ink pull, I could end up getting a brown because I'd done a red and a green. Well, that's by the by. Now, one of the other major things that I totally disagree with is what some emrab groups teach you, and that is you can resequence your design simply by moving around your objects that you've digitized, and that you don't need to do travels because you've got a connection stitch. No, I'm sorry, I don't buy that, not in a month of Sundays. When you buy a design, a pre-digitized design, that stitches out beautifully, one of the things that you will notice is that they don't jump hither and thither all over the screen. They don't have hundreds of trims, loads of unnecessary color changes. They sequence their design digitizing properly. They use travel lines to get from one spot to another. There's nothing more wearing on your machine than the hoop being asked to jump colossal distances, stretching that bobbin thread underneath, or making unnecessary trims and unnecessary tie-off and tie-on stitches, which creates problems for your machine. It creates little hard lumps of stitches underneath your fabric. Get enough of them in one area and you've got a real problem. They'll act as a brake. So I'm going to do this design using my order of digitizing. You may have a different logical sequence plan. Plan is the word. You plan your designs from start to finish. Doesn't have to be written in stone. You can ad-lib on the way, but until you have learnt to look at a graphic and instantly see the best order for digitizing, spend at least 10 minutes looking at your graphic and seeing what is there. Too many people don't see what's in their graphic. Now, when we look at this design, what we see is that the tulip is the topmost element. It lies over the roses. It also lies over a leaf. The roses lie over the stem. The paws lie over the stem. They also lie over the body. The body lays over the Easter eggs, but it lays under the head and behind it. The ears are behind the head. So the head, the paws, and the tulip, you could say, occupy a similar plane. The roses would go on the next plane. We'll call them layers. So the head, the paws, and the tulip would be on the top layer. On the second layer would be the roses. On the third layer would be the body and the ears. On the fourth layer would be the Easter eggs. So we begin with the fourth layer, because that's the one that's farthest away. You don't start by digitizing the pores, because how are you going to get your green stem in underneath? And how are you going to make the jump from that part of the stem to that part of the stem without stitching over the pores? You don't do the Easter eggs last. How are you going to make certain you've got a nice, tight, neat edge down there on the body? It's like an onion. You peel the layers off till you get to the inside. That's what you do with digitizing. And you digitize in the sequence you want the design to stitch out. You don't want to thread your machine up with pink, do the ears, and then realize that the ears had to go behind the head, so we'll move the head somewhere else. And then you think, oh, well, I'll do the stem next. And then you've got to change your pink thread. Then you decide you'll do your roses. So you've got another change, but you're only going to do the roses this side. You might go and do a bit of stem that side, so you're changing your thread again. Then you want to do your Easter eggs, so you're changing your thread again. Then you want to come and do the body, so you're changing your thread again. No, that's not how you do it. You digitize for the minimum number of thread changes. You do not want to have jumps. You don't want unnecessary trims. You need to travel. You need paths to travel along. So you always travel in an area which you haven't yet stitched, but you know is going to be stitched later. For instance, we're going to start with the eggs. And because they're going to be the first thing stitched, we've got a nice clear roadway to get from one side to the other. We don't need a trim at the end of our egg. We travel. And when we do the stripes, we do the same again. We travel. And if we're canny, we use the colours that are in the rest of the design. So when we are doing the roses, we can put in the rose colour as a stripe. Or we just do self-coloured Easter eggs and we do a pattern on top of it, or a loose density motif fill. Choice is ours. Okay, now one thing I do not use outlines. You've got to be incredibly skilled to be able to do an outline in the correct position because of lovely little bogeyman called push-pull. Stitches distort fabric, and until you completely understand the action of stitching on fabrics and the distortion that causes, stay away from outlines. Lines only exist in artwork to show you where the subject is sitting. You've got something better. You've got blocks of colour you can apply, which turn into stitches. You don't need outlines. You use fill angle directions. You use your different textures. There is never a need for an outline in a design. And once again, I spent forever talking, so in the next video, I promise you, we will start laying nodes.